I'm Alan Muia. I am the Executive Director of New Earth Recovery. We run 5 recovery residences in Skagit County, Washington. And I'm also the current chair of the Washington Alliance for Quality Recovery Residences. So we're a new organization that provides accreditation services for recovery residences across Washington, as well as professional development, technical assistance for folks who are either wanting to get into the field or folks who are already there and are just looking for a connection to a network of other providers. A recovery residence is a home of some sort, definitely a home. So we pride ourselves in being home-like environments as opposed to, say, a clinical setting. But they're homes for folks who are in recovery, primarily from substance use disorders. That really is the genesis of the recovery residence movement across the country. And there are hallmarks of recovery residences, but most of that is around providing support and accountability for people who want to be abstinence from who want to live a lifestyle of abstinence from substances that would be harmful to them. So that can look like a lot of different things. There are a lot of different flavors of recovery residences, and there are a lot of what we call levels of care for recovery residences. So that's something that we can talk more about, but essentially we're a pretty broad tent, but the things that would tie those residences together would be a real intent of the people who live in our homes to live an abstinent lifestyle and to support one another in a very intentional way about living in that direction and moving in that way. Is the recovery residence, recovery house, recovery home all the same thing? Recovery residence and recovery home generally are interchangeable kinds of terms, and that would include Oxford houses as well as houses that are accredited by Walker. Recovery house in Washington State has a very specific meaning, and the Washington Administrative Code calls those out. It's a higher level of care. There are clinical services in a recovery house, and so there are at present, I think, 10 of those across the state. And so those, it's worth just saying that those would generally, you get into those through a referral from, say, a healthcare provider or an outpatient treatment provider, or maybe from an inpatient service provider. That would be a sort of a next step. But that is a recovery house. So when you hear somebody say something like recovery house, they may be referring more to the general category of recovery residences. But if there's somebody kind of in the field, that has a very specific meaning. So who can live in a recovery residence? It really depends on the mission of the specific residence in question. So there are residences, not a lot of them, but there are a few who cater to youth. And that is their thing. And so people under the age of 18 could live there. There are also some that are very specifically catering to other groups. So for instance, there might be, we know of a couple who are all about serving veterans, and that's sort of the specialty area that they want to be about serving. There are also residences for specifically for men, specifically for women, a couple who even serve both, and there are just some good boundaries in place for those folks. And then there are residences who cater to men with children or women with children. And so there really is, depending on what you're looking for, I would say in general that we don't have enough of any of them. In other words, there's not one category or one group of folks who are, I'd say, overserved or served enough out there. We almost all of us have waiting lists of people who are waiting to get in. You might see a recovery home in Washington State that would maybe really cater to maybe a 2 to 3 month kind of stay. It's more typical that you would see something from 6 to 9 months or a year. So residents can stay in Oxford House as long as they are abiding by the house, the principles established in the Oxford Charter. They can stay there as long as they want, and as long as they're contributing to the community, then that can be a permanent home for somebody. And there are a number of people who have found a real home there, and that's where they want to be for the indefinite future. Where do they go from a recovery residence? It really depends. If someone starts out in a higher level of care, kind of a home, they may end up going to a lower level of care. So Oxford, again, is sort of the classic example of a home that doesn't offer a lot of services that are professionally provided in the home, but there is a level of peer support that a lot of people find really, really helpful in maintaining their sobriety. And so they will move from a higher level of care home into, say, an Oxford home. Or, of course, a lot of folks will graduate from recovery housing altogether, and they'll end up in a place of their own, or often a shared kind of housing situation where they might have just some accountability and connection with some people and decide to live together. But where they go from there is really up to them, and depends on what they're ready for. And some are ready to launch out and do the next thing. And community living is not for everybody, and it has challenges. So it's not something that people necessarily want to live in forever. That would be more the exception than the rule. But in general, I'd say that there is a lot of good connection that people take with them, even if they move out. They stay connected to their housemates, and those connections can be lifelong and really, really sustaining for people in recovery. In a higher level of care residence, you would find a lot of structure. So from the time a person gets up in the morning, they may do a morning gathering. They may have appointments in-house and out-of-house. A lot of services, especially their clinical services, would happen outside of the home environment. But generally speaking, if a person's fairly early on in the recovery process, they'll have a number of commitments that happen. Some inside, some outside of the house. Almost all, especially the higher level of care residences, will have a curfew of some sort. So the end of the day is pretty well defined in terms of when they need to be back home. And that's just about accountability to the community and desire to see some really good structure. Other things that would happen, of course, house meetings would happen. Sometimes those are organized recovery-based meetings. Some of those would be just about, how does this house function, and are people doing their chores, and what kind of decisions do we need to make about how this place runs? A lot of residences require some community engagement, so that might be a part of the day as well. Just maybe a volunteer kind of position, or some way that they're connected into their local community. And we find that's really part of the secret sauce of a good recovery residence, is really helping people kind of build some scaffolding in their story, so that they've got a support system. In technical lingo, we call that recovery capital, right? Part of recovery capital is having this sort of system built that will withstand stress and will withstand the things that life throws at us. And when you're new in recovery, a lot of that stuff is not in place. And so part of what happens in a residence is building that kind of those kinds of connections. Boy, COVID-19 has affected recovery residences in a variety of ways. I'd broaden that to say that that the pandemic and the response to the pandemic has really created a very difficult situation for a lot of people in recovery. If you think about sort of the perfect storm, addiction is a disease of isolation. And so we use language like social distancing, which is the exact opposite of what we want people to do in recovery. So we talk about the difference between social distancing and physical distancing, and say, don't social distance. Physical distancing makes sense. But social distance, we need you to figure out other ways to connect with with people in the community. The other thing that sort of seems like the opposite of that, but it sort of coincides often, is boredom, right? So you've got stress, boredom, isolation all together, and then on top of that, a few months back, we added the added ingredient of a $1,200 stimulus check for many people. So that, I just couldn't name a more perfect storm for return to use for somebody in recovery, early recovery especially. And yet, what a good recovery residence has done is sort of mitigate those circumstances. And so instead of somebody feeling isolated, they're with a group of people who are going through this with them. And at their best, residences can be a real hedge against that kind of pressure and that kind of stressful situation for people. If you're interested in an Oxford house, oxfordvacancies.com is the Oxford website. And so there are, in Washington state, 330 some Oxford houses in the state. And so that again is an option for a lot of people. And so there are a lot of opportunities there. Again, a lot of Oxford houses are full. So that would be something to keep in mind, that person may not be able to get into the exact house that they're interested in, but there is some mobility between homes, and so that's one place. The next place people can go is to waqrr.org. That's WAQRR.org, and from there there's a little tab that says Find a Residence, and you click on that, and you can search by county or by city and find a place. That is we're a much smaller directory than the Oxford directory at this point, and very soon there will be a state website. So the Healthcare Authority, you can go to their site, and there will be basically a finder tool that's an interactive map. So you'll be able to click on an area and find both Oxford housing and recovery residences that are accredited by Walker, as well as tribal recovery residences as well. So those three types of homes will all be searchable through the Healthcare Authority website. So that will be a great resource once that's up and running.